Welcome to PrimeAlpha's interview series, insights from industry practitioners discussing their journey and their discoveries. Hello, my name is Amanda Jogia, the CEO of PrimeAlpha, an online ecosystem bringing together alternative opportunities and their investors. I have the pleasure of bringing to you this special podcast on carbon credits. Even though the idea of carbon credits started in 1968 when economist John Dales suggests the idea of tradable allowances as a means of controlling pollution, carbon credits are now just emerging as an asset class. I have the pleasure of welcoming our panelists, Hong and Kevin Duan, to give us a primer on carbon credits. The goal of this podcast is to get a good general overview of carbon credits, and we will follow on with more podcasts and events to delve deeper on the opportunity. I would like to introduce our first panelist. Hong is a venture capitalist, philanthropist, and advisor to global family offices. He's the founder and managing partner of Alcove Management, a global early-stage venture fund, and has spent the last 5 years investing in and growing technology startups in various domains from inception to plus $1 billion valuations. He combines expertise, capital, and network to source and calibrate unique proprietary investment opportunities across the U.S. and emerging markets. My next panelist is Kevin Duan, who is a managing partner at his family's family office. He's an active investor in technology startups ranging from seed stage to pre-IPO, and he has a special interest in impact investing. Welcome, Kyle and Kevin. Really excited to get the conversation going.
Thank you for having us.
Kyle, let's start with you. Tell us about your journey with carbon credits. Why is this important to you?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you, Amanda, for having us here. As a venture capitalist, you always want to be aware of new opportunities, new paradigm shifts, market dynamics, innovation at the earlier stages, including access to proprietary information and data. So this new trend caught my attention a couple of months ago, starting with this event in November. It's the 26th UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, and it'll be a forum to ask countries to set their 2030 emission standards in order to hit the net zero ambitions for our planet by 2050. In other words, governments are privatizing decarbonization. They're essentially accelerating the phase out of coal. They're also curtailing deforestation, speeding up the switch to electric vehicles and also investments into renewable energy. Now we have 181 countries that have signed the Paris Climate Accord to set these standards for each industry. So if you're in the automotive industry, airline industry, transportation, oil and gas, you name it, where the normal course of business generates carbon emissions, you're allowed to hit a certain point of carbon you're consuming or producing. Anything above that, you need to buy offsets or carbon credits to buy yourself down that level. And that's what the cap and trade program is for. For multiple reasons, I think this is pretty important for us. For starters, I think the most obvious one is the status quo. In simple terms, the current methodologies deployed in our industries are creating significant waste and harm to humanity and our environment. For statistics, damages incurred as a result of climate change in 2019 was over 100 billion alone. And the cost to the global economy of accumulated climate change damages by 2050 is forecasted at just under $8 trillion. We've been observing this global trend with growing demand in the marketplace to really fulfill this need to reach carbon neutrality or net zero by 2035. And corporations, governments have already been implementing changes internally within their structures. So for instance, just a month ago, the CME Group out of Chicago, which is the Commodities and Mercantile Exchange, they just authorized environmental carbon futures trading. So on the 5th of August, they started trading CME futures. Another example is REDD+, which stands for Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation. It's another UN-backed framework that aims to curb climate change by stopping the destruction of forests, where the plus kind of signifies the role of conservation, sustainable management of forests, enhancements of forest carbon stocks. So, we're seeing countries learn about the value of their forests, carbon and ecosystem services. And these financial incentives are being outlined as we speak to reduce deforestation and promote sustainable management.
Thanks, Kyle. So Kevin, as a family office, why is this important to you and why should this be important to other family offices?
I think what made the idea of carbon credits immediately interesting to me from a family office perspective was a combination of a number of things. And I think firstly among those was an increasing relevance of climate change and the idea of climate change prevention. And that's an idea that I've been hearing about and talking about since I was old enough to even go to school. It's been relevant to me for my entire life and has been, I think, a huge part of what sort of shaped my upbringing almost. And I think this relevance contributes to what will probably be an accelerated growth of the carbon industry as a whole. I think a lot of companies that are going to be planning ahead and anticipating environmental restrictions, tighter policy, are probably going to be putting a lot of effort and capital into this emerging industry. And I think furthermore that the fact that there's an industry for the removal and control of carbon that's coming up now, and it's going to be a market that is going to grow and become increasingly relevant and likely lucrative over time as environmental policy and or restrictions grow tighter over time. And so on a time scale for me, thinking 10, 20, 30 years into the future down the line, I think this industry is going to be a lot bigger than it is at the moment, and it's going to have to be in a lot of ways. And so thinking on the time scale of perhaps decades down the line, I think is a time frame that I'm much happier working with from a family office perspective. I prefer to keep things in the long term and think about things a lot further down the line than a year or 2 years. But I think beyond just the investment side of the carbon market, I think the impact that these investments have is another strong draw for me. I think it's a great start into ESG investments for a newer family office. And it has an impact that's really palpable and in a lot of ways very necessary for the greater good. For context, the world produces 43 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year, at least as of 2019 it did. I believe it's gone up since. And the ultimate goal of creating this emerging market is to get that number down to zero. And while that's a very daunting number, 43 billion tons is pretty big, it's still a finite number. And I think in a number of ways, that makes it a goal that feels feasible and where with each year that passes, you can quantify the impact that you can make through each carbon investment that you do. And so overall, I think that this is an investment that does something beneficial and it's doing something in the long term. And it's also a kind of investment that has a lot of potential to grow over time. And so for me, it made a lot of sense to kind of get into this from a family office perspective.
I might misquote this. Benjamin Franklin said, doing well by doing good. So in terms of the perspective of the family office, how do you think about it in terms of your investment portfolio?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that immediately drew me to carbon credits was the idea of environmental protection growing increasingly relevant. So, for example, you'll hear a lot of public leaders and experts weighing in on the topic of the environment or laws and policies being passed that are tighten restrictions on emissions for a lot of different industries and companies. And I think there's a lot of potential there for the industry to grow quickly as the relevance of environmental protection grows, as well as a demand for environmental responsibility from a lot of different corporate entities. So I think overall that makes carbon a good ESG investment. And from a family office perspective, and as a new family office, I think ESG has been something I've been wanting to get into as soon as I can. And I think carbon's a great place to start. I do like the flexible approach that you can take to investing in a lot of these carbon companies. I think carbon being an emerging industry gives it a lot of potential for a lot of different kinds of investments in different kinds of companies. So personally, from a family office perspective, I prefer to work in long-term investments. So projects with longer timeframes will grow steadily with the relevance of environmental protection are things that really appeal to me. Ultimately, while I do like the investment opportunities that are provided by this emerging market, I also do just want to protect the environment and help make it better any way that I can. The environment's been relevant to me for a long time now, and it's nice to contribute to something that I really do feel like makes an impact.
So Kyle, can you talk about what is the measurable impact of carbon credits?
Sure. It's difficult to pinpoint to one specific factor as there are hundreds of carbon credit deals out there and opportunities. I'm under NDA with all the entities I've been in high-level conversations with, but maybe to name a few projects already driving some positive changes. There was a successful forest carbon project in an area of the Peruvian Amazon, which had the country's highest deforestation rates. And they were able to cut that by 75%, which resulted in 7 million ton reduction of carbon emissions, which is equivalent to taking more than 1 million cars off the road each year. So some 70% of the local community in this area, they benefited from this program through better healthcare and agricultural training, which also had real benefits and payoffs. So for instance, the income that was provided by this carbon project helped a local coffee cooperative called Alto Mayo's Coffee Crop to invest in productivity and quality and really establish access to new markets. So even as the pandemic wrecked Peru's economy, the cooperative's exports grew by 50% last year in 2020, which earned over $3 million in revenue since 2016. There was another carbon offsets program in California, which saw more than 100 million credits traded to date, generating more than 500 million in revenue, with most of that going directly to local communities. There's an ongoing project in Brazil that Alcove is gearing up to sign a potential joint venture in the coming months that is conserving and avoiding deforestation of more than 500,000 hectares of primary, ancient, and undisturbed rainforest in the Amazon. So with measurable benefits to local indigenous communities, including promotions to improve infrastructure, education, community organization, encouraging sustainable use of natural resources, supporting special community research and development projects. And also on a more regional level, there's private and public sector cooperation. And this capacity building really expands private investments across the REDD projects with official public natural reserves and other protected areas in the region. And then lastly, the protection of endangered species and habitats, which leads to exceptional biodiversity benefits. So as you can see from these real life case studies, the positive changes can be incremental in value to a vast number of communities out there.
So what are the risks of investing in this asset class?
Right. I think the biggest risk is that carbon credits as an asset class is still very new. There are basic financial models that we have access to, but the problem is because this industry as a whole is so new, there's not a lot of data that's publicly available as far as where the trades are. That being said, there's a group out in London called IHS Markit that's publishing OPIS reports. And these OPIS reports are now trying to keep track of who's trading carbon credits, the volumes, the price that they're trading at, the different vintages that they're trading. So they're the first ones trying to attempt to put together some actual market data that we can use for price forecasting. And this kind of leads to my next point, that the voluntary carbon market today needs to be largely transparent, verifiable, and environmentally robust. Today's market, though, is fortunately still fragmented and complex. So some credits have turned out to represent emissions reductions that were questionable. Due to the limited pricing data, it can be challenging for some buyers to know whether they are paying a fair price, and for suppliers to really manage the risk that they're taking by financing and working on carbon reduction projects without really knowing how much buyers will ultimately pay for their carbon credits. So I think all projects do come with risks, and many types could struggle to attract financing because of the long-term, lags between the initial investment made and the eventual sale of the credits. That being said, I have seen high-quality carbon credit deals get oversubscribed immediately by large industrial players where offsets have been sold even before they were issued. So the performance and ROI do vary project by project based on their quality. And each carbon credit has attributes associated with the underlying project, like the type of project or the region where it was carried out. These attributes affect the overall price of the credit because buyers add additional attributes. They value additional attributes differently. So for instance, to use carbon credits issued from deforestation as an example, I believe it was the National Geographic that quoted the Brazilian rainforest as the lungs of the earth because the amount of density and the amount of carbon that the rainforest produces. The second largest rainforest in the world is in Indonesia, and the third is in the Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa. And maintaining these natural reserves have a significant impact on the global climate. So if you think about the density of these three rainforests dwarfing other lands like Canada and other Pacific Northside states in the US, would this mean that due to the density, these top three nations will price their carbon credits at a premium? Well, potentially, but there are so many other multiple factors that go into pricing a carbon credit. So one is permanence, meaning in a perfect world, we'd have, for instance, 100-year rights to certain plots of land. And we want to see longer periods as possible for permanence. Well, buyers don't want to get involved in projects that will last 2 to 3 years before they disappear. Secondly is additionality. And this has to do with the number of scrutiny in the environmental space right now, as I had mentioned earlier, where some project managers are saying, hey, I'm going to create carbon credits off of this project, where in actuality, they're not really creating any additional credits. So investors, governments, corporates are looking for high quality projects that contribute to hitting the amount of sustainable development goals that the UN has set in place. So if, for instance, if we contribute to the local indigenous communities in Latin America, we're also setting up medical clinics, improving schools. We're teaching them sustainable farming and fishing techniques, where these types of programs help inform people about deforestation, educate people, improve their lives. So all of this stuff really adds extra value to our credits. And the counties that we operate in, for instance, in Brazil, will have larger budgets for its municipal workforce, add labor contracts and increase pensions, which would bring other kinds of benefits. The effects can really go viral from here. So the impact spins off to businesses that provide services to their towns. Businesses in other areas will open up and more jobs could be created. So that's the additionality aspect that adds the extra value. All to the point that I'm making here, which is that an advanced data infrastructure would really promote the transparency of reference and market data. Now, with sophisticated and timely data all being essential for all environmental and capital markets. So the current OTC market is difficult to track, but buyers and suppliers would really benefit from new reporting or analytic services that can consolidate openly accessible resources, reference data from multiple registries through APIs to create consensus about the proper use of carbon credits. So I think for companies and investors like us, we'd really benefit from installments of such mechanisms to safeguard the carbon credits integrity as an overall push towards net zero emissions.
So Kyle, how do people get involved, or how can investors invest in carbon credits?
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that there are many types of investments out there around carbon credits. So these opportunities vary in asset class, geography, exit timeframes, depending on whether you're investing in these credits through purchasing real estate or making a legacy investment or a dividend play as a passive investor or as a long-term venture capital investor. While the increase in demand for carbon credits has doubled from 2019 to 2020 and is significantly growing, I'd classify carbon credit deals into 4 large buckets where investors can start off. 1 is the avoided nature loss, including deforestation. 2 is nature-based sequestration with reforestation. 3 is avoidance or reduction of emissions such as methane from landfills. And 4, which is most related to venture capital, technology-related removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So confidentially, Alcove is in discussion with several teams across the US and Latin America to potentially collaborate simply as a shareholder or through a joint venture type of a structure, including this development project of a prolific helium and carbon dioxide field in eastern Arizona. We're looking at technology startups in Palo Alto that are innovating the use of solar power in industrial applications. We've also looked at companies brewing sustainable alternatives to the palm oil industry and others utilizing proprietary geothermal resources across North America. As we are in the process of launching some vehicles exclusively for Alcove LPs and strategic partners who are looking to offset directly for their own family business corporate needs as well, I am open to speaking with anybody who is interested in the carbon credit space. Do feel free to reach out if you'd like to learn more about Alcove's plan in the ESG space, starting with carbon credits, or to simply bounce ideas and share insights.
Thank you, Kyle and Kevin, for taking the time to walk us through carbon credits. I look forward to a deeper dive into the nuances of the asset class next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us. It's been a pleasure.